Okay, friends, we are back again to talk about Reign Season 2. Before we get into the recap, I've prepared a little presentation for you, so let's go over that. Okay, so let's talk about where we were previously on Reign. At the end of the season, King Henry had just passed away, and Francis was set to take the throne. If you remember, Francis was the one that actually killed his father, so there's a lot of inner turmoil going on there. He hasn't told anybody about it. Mary had publicly made her bid for the English throne by wearing the English coat of arms at a major event that was attended by a bunch of lords, dukes, stuff like that. And Francis and Mary were working to clear the air between them, reveal their secrets, and go into their role as rulers with a loving marriage. However, when Mary gets a letter that Lola has gone into labor in a far-off village, in good conscience reveals the truth of Lola's baby's paternity to Francis, and he rushes off to be with her, despite the beginnings of the plague sweeping the kingdom, leaving Catherine and Mary alone to rule without him. So let's talk about some of the side relationships like I did in the last video. I don't talk about each individual plot line of the side relationships within the episodes themselves because I find it to be a little bit much. It's just a lot of plot lines all at once and to do in a recap. So I thought we could talk about the relationships separately. So first off, we will talk about Lola and Narcisse. So Narcisse makes a bit of a splash on the show. In his first episode, he's set up as kind of a piece of garbage. He doesn't treat people very well. He's very conniving, and despite herself, Lola definitely has an attraction to him that starts off very sexual. She is introduced to him sort of through this book. Talks about a lady's escapades in the court and all of the best lovers in the court, and Narcisse is like the best of the best. And he finds out that she read about him in a book, and they sort of start this sexual relationship. However, Narcisse is not someone that Lola necessarily wants to be with, and so they end up having a falling out whenever his plans to take over the throne or to ruin the throne really come to light. They do have some back and forth after the split initially happens, and we're kind of left up in the air with their relationship at the end of the season. Then we have Greer, Castleroy, and Leith. Now, when I was doing the notes for this season, I would say they are the most robust side relationships. They had the most going on. So, Greer and Leith in the last season. Leith was a kitchen boy, bakery, whatever, and Greer is Mary's lady's maid. She ends up getting engaged to Castleroy because he's supposed to help her family, give them dowry money for her sisters and stuff like that. So they get married. However, Greer and Leith really had this very strong connection. Going into season 2, Castleroy's daughter has kind of a thing with Leith, and they're supposed to meet up the night that the plague sweeps through the castle. And Greer goes to him and tries to convince him not to meet with her. He ends up not meeting with her, and she gets killed. Castleroy blames Leith for this. He blames Leith for her being kind of where she is. She was kind of wrong place, wrong time sort of situation, but he blames Leith for this. So Greer and Castleroy go off. They have their own country estate. They go off, and they're separated from Leith. He's kind of becomes a farmer, and then he becomes a higher position within the castle. And then Castleroy and Greer end up getting involved in a Protestant assassination attempt, unbeknownst to them. Castleroy is a Protestant, and he gives money to the Protestant organization, thinking that it's going to be going towards a school, and he finds out that it was actually going towards an assassination attempt on the crown. And so Castleroy has to go on the run. Greer ends up being ruined by this, and she becomes a madam. Her and Leith end up getting back together once Castleroy is imprisoned and Greer becomes a madam. But Leith asks her to marry him, and she says no because she doesn't want to give up being a madam. She has a good job. She has a good working relationship with these women, and she doesn't want to give that up to get married and have children. So they end up splitting. Catherine and Narcisse is kind of the weirdest one. This is the relationship that I remembered the most with Narcisse and with Catherine. And when they started showing up on screen together, I remembered that they had a relationship, but it didn't quite go how I remembered it going. So Narcisse kind of recognizes that Catherine is scheming. She has some things on the side. She has some plans in place for when she no longer has any power, just to set herself up for the future. She's a bit of a schemer. And he kind of recognizes that in her, and so he tries to make deals with her. She doesn't really agree, and they go back and forth. After things fall out with him and Lola, and also him and Francis, he kind of saddles up to Catherine. Catherine's definitely the more dominant one. Catherine's the one that kind of is bossing him around, and she also is sort of losing her mind around the time when they get together, and so their relationship is very strained. She's very possessive, and it's kind of a situation where he doesn't know what he's getting into until he's in it, and once he's in it, he does not like it. So then we have Mary and Conde, which you can see right here. They are on this as a side relationship, but this relationship is a good portion of the latter half of the season. Conde is actually Francis's cousin, and he has some sort of connection to the throne. Like somewhere along the way, he could possibly take the throne. And he has a thing with Mary. They initially just start working together politically because he's a Protestant sympathizer and she is leaning more towards peace between the Protestants and the Catholics, whereas Francis, through some events of blackmail and things like that, is forced to go against what Mary would generally want. So she works with Conde. They sort of form a relationship, and then they get closer and closer towards the end of the season. He's infatuated with her. He kind of swoops in at a time when she's very vulnerable, and you can look at it from either way of like she didn't have anybody that she could turn to, that she could trust, that she felt was disconnected from this major trauma that she endures, or you can look at it from the standpoint of he kind of swooped in when she was vulnerable and used that against her to like vie for power. Regardless, they end up having a brief fling that results in like a mini war between Conde and the Protestants of France and Francis and the crown. Then we have Mary, Lola, and Francis. I would say this is the most low-key of the side relationships, mostly because a lot of the hurt and betrayal is just a carryover from the first season. Obviously, in the beginning of the season, Lola and Francis come back with their child, John, and Lola is now presumed to be a mistress to Francis, even though she's really not, but she's afforded all of the things of being a mistress. There is a little bit of a strained dynamic between Mary and Lola in the beginning. They end up fighting about it, and they end up resolving all of their issues towards the end of the season, especially after this traumatic thing happens to Mary. And then Francis kind of sort of has this moment with Lola, but she shuts that down again later on in the season. So this is more of like just continuing to figure out the dynamics. Mary is obviously very hurt about not being able to have a child with Francis while he has this child with someone else. So again, it's kind of a low-key part, but it is some side relationships. And then lastly, we have Kenna and Renaud. I'm going to pronounce his name differently every single time I say it, but in the beginning of season 2, Kenna is with Bash, who is the bastard to Henry and Francis's brother. They were forced together by Henry, and they sort of form a love match, but Kenna is very unhappy with her station. She has this desire to be a lady and to have nice dresses and a nice chateau, and Bash just does not really have the same sort of motivations as her. He doesn't want a title. He doesn't want to really be participating in court, and so they end up falling apart, basically. She starts getting courted by Anton, who is Conde's brother and a king of another country, and this completely destroys their relationship because she does end up kissing him, and then she gets with Renaud after they have a happenstance meeting, and it doesn't last very long. He pretty quickly gets killed for treason, but she is... Kenna as a character is very interesting because I think she has such a strong personality. Her actress is fantastic, but I just don't know if they knew what to do with her character, and she ends up just kind of being this character that has, like, romantic tension with every single guy on the cast, and it's kind of lame. I think they could have done better, but regardless, that is her. Aside from Anton, who is, like, a very brief thing, she does have the thing with him for a couple episodes. Let's talk about the main characters so you can kind of get a picture in your head before we go into the recap. So obviously we have Mary, and I would say a lot of the main cast of characters stays the same from season 1 to season 2, so I'm not going to go into too terribly much what's going on with them, but we have Mary, Francis, Catherine, Bash, Kenna, Nostradamus, Greer, Castleroy, Lath, and Lola. Those are the returning cast of characters. As far as new characters, we have Condé, his brother Anton, Claude, who is Francis's biological sister, Catherine's daughter, Renaud, who is the general, he dies after like 2 episodes, Delphine, who is a healer and a nun, and she comes in later. And then I think the last one we don't have from season 1 is Narcisse, down here in the corner. So those are our main cast of characters for the season. Let's get into a recap and talk about all of the things that happen. Okay, so I wanted to do this section of the video a little bit different than I have in my past recaps. And excuse me, I'm petting my cat right here, but I wanted to do more of like an in real time as I'm watching the episodes, like 4 episodes at a time sort of deal, so that I could really get into the recap and like really talk about what happened, because I find that especially when I watch the full season and then I come to you guys with a recap, it's more of just like me reading it into the record rather than me just like talking about all of the drama and stuff. Season 2 opens up with Castle being shut down. If you recall, at the end of season 1, the plague hit France, and Francis was off being with Lola, giving birth to their son. And so that has left Mary and Catherine to run the French court without him. He goes off to wherever Lola is in some small village giving birth. Oh, and I should mention that I am going to be breaking down the episodes into different plot lines. So like, if there's 3 different plot lines in the episode, I'm going to talk about each plot line by itself so that we're not jumping from points of view, because again, I can find that to be a little bit confusing. The episode starts with the castle being shut down because of the plague, and anybody that's showing any sign of illness being quarantined. The nobles are being quarantined in their chambers. The quote-unquote low-born people are being quarantined in cells or in, isolated areas away from the nobles. And Catherine and Mary are being isolated in the throne room in their own chambers, together but separate from everybody else, and they're just going to great measures to make sure that the plague never reaches them. So as a kind of a carryover from the previous season, Pascal is the character that was involved in the pagan situation that they then saved and brought to the castle, and kind of became something of a caregiver for him. So in the beginning of episode 1, they're freely walking around the castle. And they eventually interact with someone carrying the plague, and they get locked up in chambers with dead bodies, with people that have died from the plague. Pascal ends up catching the plague and dies in essentially Kenna's arms. They're not actually interacting, they're not touching and stuff, but she's talking to him through a door. And Bash tries to hunt them down and has contact with a plague carrier himself. And he starts having symptoms, and it seems like he's getting sick. And towards the end of the episode, he sees this ghost girl who basically claims he's immune, he's fine, he's not gonna die. but there is a reckoning coming. Francis makes it to Lola and his son in that small village, and Nostradamus follows him to bring him back at the behest of Catherine and Mary. Francis and Lola leave that village in a hurry after a boy shows up showing signs of the plague, and they come across a group of noblemen, including one of Francis's cousins, Conde, in the woods. Conde has a boat, and they plan on fleeing France to escape the plague. They camp with them for the night and argue about what to do with their son. Francis wants her to leave France, and Lola wants to stay. They are introduced to a local lord in that area via Conde, and the lord's name is Narcisse. Now, the reputation of Narcisse is not that great, and when they actually come across him, he has a woman locked in a cage, and the woman is the same woman who helped Lola give birth to their son. But they end up lying to Narcisse about why Francis is there, what's going on, what their plan is, and Narcisse tries to sow some seeds of discontent amongst them by saying, hey, Conde has this boat that could get Lola and your baby out of France, but he just hasn't told you about it. So Francis confronts Conde about it, and they make a plan for Lola and their child to get on the boat the next morning and escape. But the next morning, as everybody's packing up to leave, Francis hears their baby crying in the tent where they're staying alone, and when he picks up the baby, he has this moment with the baby where he's soothing him, and he ultimately decides that he doesn't want Lola and the child to leave. Back at the castle, everybody is still quarantined, but a lord of a very influential family named Edward Narcisse, who supplies food to the castle via his lord father Narcisse. I don't remember what his first name is, but I'll refer to them as Edward and Narcisse. He basically goes to them and tries to blackmail them into killing a rival lord named Volland, who he claims slept with his wife, or he will stop providing grain and harvest to the castle, essentially starving the people in the castle if they don't have this guy killed. Mary denies him, but the local villagers start burning all of their homes, and they leave them without options for a grain supplier. And when Nostradamus comes back and says that he found a house marked as a plague house and nobody in the house, Catherine and Mary take that to mean that Lola and Francis are dead. So Catherine starts plotting on how to get grain and how to make her sons, her youngest sons, or her oldest youngest son, the future king, because Mary doesn't have an heir. And Francis's other heir, they think, the baby is dead. So she starts making plans, and Mary is getting heat from this other lord. So she works with Nostradamus to make a temporary potion that would give Catherine the symptoms of the plague without actually giving her the plague. And so she gets sick, and it completely takes her out. She's completely out of her scheming and stuff like that. So Mary is able to handle Edward. She denies Edward. She says she's not going to murder this man just for some petty squabble, just to, get blackmailed. She's not going to be blackmailed into making decisions. The Edward retaliates by poisoning the Volland's entire family. And when Mary finds this out, she has Volland thrown into the sick room, which is basically just where the lowborns are in the cells of the castle, is essentially given the plague. And as he's dying, as they're throwing him in there, he's perfectly healthy, they're throwing him in there with all of the lowborn people, he says that his father, Narcisse, will get revenge. In episode 2, Francis returns healthy with Lola, the baby, and his cousin Conde in tow, and Mary, ever the angel, welcomes Lola back warmly, and Francis starts making plans on how he's going to rule France as the new king. Mary and Frances get back enthusiastically to making errors. Up to this point, they have struggled to get pregnant. They've had no pregnancies that we've seen thus far. And that puts Mary and their rule in jeopardy now that he has this bastard, now that he has this illegitimate heir. And if he were to decide to give that child a title, that puts her standing as the queen of not only France and Scotland in jeopardy. So during this episode, there's a lot of tension amongst the three of them in which they're trying to figure out the relationship dynamics. You can really tell in this episode that Mary is really struggling with not only the jealousy and betrayal of the relationship between Lola and Frances, but also wanting to do right by this innocent child that really had no say. And while she's kind of struggling, Frances is also struggling with whether he should claim the child and the possibility that that child could be his only child, and what the effect on the child's life would be if he maintains his distance like his father did with Sebastian. Ultimately, Mary does give Frances the blessing to claim him, and there's still a lot of hurt and anger there, but that is kind of resolved for now. Lord Narcisse returns to the court demanding answers for the death of his son, and Catherine and Mary decide to hide his son's deception from him, blaming his death on the plague. So they don't tell him that he had an entire family murdered. But when Lord Narcisse finds his son's body, he discovers someone still alive in that cell, and they tell him the truth. He demands justice with the backing of all of the other nobles, claiming that Nostradamus was the one that murdered his son, Edward. Mary admits to ordering Edward's death and poisoning Catherine to get her out of the way temporarily. And when Frances and Catherine demand that they cede to the desire of the nobles to get justice on Nostradamus and the guard, she doesn't want to bow to the nobles. That's not the sort of ruler that she wants to be going forward. That was kind of the way that Catherine and Henry ran their court, and she did not like it, so she doesn't want to be that sort of person. So she wants to make a plan to figure out what to do. Tells Narcisse the truth, tells him that that his son caused the death of an entire family, children, women, innocent people, not just Valens. And Narcisse doesn't really seem that, shocked by it. And Mary is able to work out that it probably wasn't the truth that this guy slept with Edward's wife, and she kind of deduces that it was actually Narcisse's doing, wanting Valens dead. But when she asks Narcisse for the truth and kind of demands it as his queen, he makes it very clear that him and the nobles will not respect or listen to anything that Frances and Mary say, and that if they try to push against the nobles, there will be problems. They intend to draw in court Nostradamus and all the guards who played a part in Edward's death, regardless of what they say. Frances tells her off for making the decision to kill Edward alone, and rightfully she tells him right back about abandoning her and their country during the plague for his mistress. And she has some really good points. She's basically just calling his ass out, and he tries to push it off and is like, this isn't the time, we need to figure it out. So this conversation keeps coming up. They keep having disagreements where she brings up the betrayal and the impact of this, and he just continues to put it off. Frances sends Bash out to follow up on rumors that Narcisse murders people to take their land, and Mary wants to find out why Narcisse wanted Valens dead. She finds a letter from the king's council from Valens to the king, claiming he wanted an audience with Frances before he died. She asks Lola to find out more. Lola finds out that Valens took a confessional, and they try to seek out the father that he talked to. The father does reveal that Narcisse and Valens worked together to assist the church, but were actually keeping a lot of the tithes that were from the people to the church for themselves. And when a Catholic cardinal found out he was murdered by Valende and Narcisse. Valende was racked by guilt, and he planned to make a confession not only to a father but also to Francis, and when Narcisse found out that he planned to confess, Narcisse had him killed. The father refuses to testify to what he knows, and this is a common roadblock with Narcisse. He has an incredible amount of power. He's been influential in the French court for a long time, and there's often references to how much the French court actually owes Narcisse as like a person, like the entity of the French court owing, or the French country or the country owing Narcisse as a person, like against his estate, because he has so much money. And so he has a lot of influence, and a lot of people don't want to go against him because of his reputation. Francis and Mary have to figure out a scheme. They have to figure out a way to save Nostradamus and the guards. So they cook up a scheme. Mary shows up while Nostradamus is literally being ripped apart, and says that she found a confession letter from Valende, and she had it with her fastest riders sent to the Vatican, proving that Narcisse murdered a cardinal. Francis interrupts her speech and says, "Get back in your place as a woman, as my wife, as the queen, whatever. I'm the king. You're going to listen to me. Get back to our rooms. We'll discuss this later in a place where it's you know, where it's more appropriate to have a conversation between husband and wife, whatever." Basically dismissing her and saying, "This isn't your place. Like, you don't make decisions." In private, Francis makes a deal with Condé that he will burn the letters to the Vatican from Valende, repayment for dropping the whole his son being murdered thing and all of that. Narcisse can have any of the land that he wants. And unfortunately, the lands that he wants is owned by Leith. It was the land that Leith was granted after saving Francis's life during the war. He basically now has even more power, even more land, even more money. The land that he's granted is a large part of the harvest that goes to the kingdom and feeds people, and now he just has even more power. During this episode, Bash starts asking villagers about Narcisse's crimes and finds a mass grave of murdered people. And speaking to the villagers, it becomes pretty apparent that it's not just like Narcisse who is murdering people and blaming it on the plague, but everybody's doing it. Lords, thieves, random people from the church are doing it. Everybody is just murdering people, throwing them in mass graves, and blaming it on the plague. And while he's visiting one of the mass graves, there's a woman standing over it who seems to be doing like some sort of ritual or some sort of cleansing ritual, saying prayers, something like that. She says that the plague has weakened the veil between the living and the dead, and there's been reports that ghosts are showing up, dead people are showing up. There's been stories all over the kingdom about it, and that a reckoning is coming. And Bash, during this episode, makes a decision to set all the rights wrong, find out all of the ghosts, how to turn the kingdom around, how to get the kingdom back in order. And he is given the title of the king's deputy, which is like basically a cop, I guess. I don't know how he would be the cop for all of France, but he's like the leader of the cops, I guess. So flashing back to earlier, the morning of Nostradamus' execution, Catherine visits Nostradamus in his cell, where she kind of intuits via some things that Nostradamus says that Clarissa is still alive and that Nostradamus' visions of Francis's death have returned. And Catherine demands to know the truth right as he's being carried away, and he essentially turns against her and says, "Ask me when I'm dead. Ask my statue that you're going to erect for me." And after he is saved by Mary and Francis, he wants to get away from Catherine because, like, obviously he's turned against her, and so he is sent away and leaves the French court. When Francis is visiting his son in the nursery, his and Lola's son, the nursemaid at the nursery is possessed, seemingly, by the ghost of Henry, his father, who calls him a usurper. That's basically it. Like, he basically just says, like, "I'm still here, usurper," and then leaves. So episode 3 centers around Francis's coronation, and despite the scores of dead and dying people, the famine and the poverty sweeping the kingdom, and the crown's lack of resources, Catherine plans this huge parade, this big festival, and when Mary and Francis push back on the expense, Catherine claims that it's the only course of action to save them from looking weak to possible overthrowers. The largest plotline of this episode centers around them not receiving their harvest from Narcisse, and when Francis confronts Narcisse about the missing grain, he claims that the workers are too lazy because they're hungry and sad. So it's very clear that Narcisse is trying to starve the kingdom in revenge for his son's murder. Because Francis can't just take the land from Narcisse and give it to somebody else for fear of the nobles rebelling, Francis spends the episode trying to make deals with different nobles to kind of secure food. It starts with a newly appointed Lord Ducasse, who is kind of an unassuming guy. He's a new lord, newly titled, but it's clear that that Narcisse has been threatening anybody that tries to help Francis. Francis tries to assure them that they're under his protection and they'll be fine, but Narcisse kidnaps Lord Ducasse's youngest son and threatens him off, basically saying if you provide any harvest, it's going to get worse for your family. Like, I'll kill your family. A Protestant duke from Germany named Schuler approaches Mary, asks if she will release Protestant prisoners who were imprisoned during Henry's rule simply for being Protestant. And in repayment for releasing these prisoners, he will offer the best grain around. His grain, the best grain that they could possibly get. Francis pushes away the idea because he thinks that a Protestant lord providing food will kind of piss off the other Catholic nobles, but Francis is not really getting the grain from anywhere else. Like, he's not making these deals. He's not wheeling and dealing. He's not working with or against Narcisse. Like, he's just not making the moves. So Mary's like, I need to take this upon myself. Especially when Herr Schuler, the German lord or duke or whatever he is, comes and says, you can't get Narcisse and hold. I have no plans to work with a kingdom that bows to Protestant or to Catholic religious persecution, like Catholics, like a Catholic ruler who doesn't care about Protestant lives. And I'm leaving and I'm taking my grain with me and the deal is off. Mary again tries to go to Francis and Francis is still resistant to it and basically tells her, like, you need to back off, you need to hide, you need to, like, at least until the grain is secured, you need to don't show your face, don't try to do any queenly things. Well, she's like, you're not doing shit. Like, you're not helping, you're not getting us grain, you're not getting us food, we're all starving to death, or we're going to be starving to death. So she makes the deal with the German Duke behind Francis's back. The next day, they're having like a little event or whatever, a little dancing party or some shit out in the woods. And the German Duke rolls up with all of his people, all of his guards, and basically says, you lied to us. The Protestant prisoners are not there, and we found a ton of torture devices in the cells. And there's like a little kerfuffle, a little scuffle going on. And Mary and Francis have to figure out how to fix this quick. Not only are the Catholic French lords pissed off because they had a Protestant lord threaten them, but now Mary has made this deal behind Francis's back. Mary's trying to figure out where the fuck the prisoners went. Francis is trying to keep the nobles happy. Mary deduces that Condé had something to do with it because one of the women that the guards mentioned distracted them while the prisoners were being stolen was a courtesan that matched a description of a courtesan that Mary saw Condé with earlier in the day. So she comes across Condé as he's trying to leave. Condé confirmed that he stole the prisoners because German Protestants were attacking a boat of a woman that he loved. And Mary basically is like, you're a better man than this. I don't think this is you. I want you to return the prisoners. he ends up returning the prisoners, and they're able to get Narcisse in line and guarantee his grain. During this episode, Francis also orders Bash to look into the Lord who was charged with killing Henry back in the joust tournament that Francis actually sat in for. The Lord that was suspected of being the person that killed Henry, and his possible connection to the possessed nanny that was actually dismissed after she was, saying that about Francis. And there's no connection. The Lord left the French court after being pardoned, hasn't been back, and there's no connection to the nanny at all. So Francis has his guards hunt down the nanny, and he hires a medium to go with him to determine whether she is possessed. Francis and the medium visit the nanny. The spirit of Henry immediately takes over. Henry accuses Francis of murdering him, not in so many words, saying he can't move on to the afterlife, and Francis begs him to leave. And the episode, the scenes kind of cut out there, so we don't get too many more in this episode, but the situation is definitely not resolved. And the episode ends with Francis's coronation, and he apologizes to Mary for asking her to step back from decision making for their countries with the nobles, and claims that he's not just being coronated, they are to rule together. And after he is crowned and sits on the throne, Mary is crowned and takes her throne. So those are the first 3 episodes. I think this was a really strong start to the season. These 3 episodes, I settle into the show right away. I love how quickly the show just sucks you in and keeps you engaged. It's so fast paced. Whereas with the first season, it definitely took a little bit to get into. We're full steam ahead here, as CW shows tend to do. Okay, let's talk about episodes 4 through 15. I was going to do 4 or 5 at a time, and then I got sick, and I marathoned all of the episodes. You can probably still hear a little bit of the congestion in my voice, but I'm gonna just keep talking until I can't anymore, until my throat will not allow me. Episode 4 centers around the christening of Lola and Francis's child. If you'll remember, Mary gave Francis the okay to claim their child, and they never say the child's name except in a later episode where it's revealed that his name is John. So I'm gonna call him John from here on out, but we don't find that out until later, which I find a little bit weird. It might have just been a writing thing, or it's something that I missed amongst all the other stuff. But his name is John. Conde shows up to warn Francis of a shepherd in a nearby village who is attacked by a mysterious group of dark-robed figures. Bash and Conde visit the shepherd, and he claims the dark-robed figures offered him a mark to help him prosper. In repayment, he had to rebuke all of his religion. They would offer him and his family and his farm protection, but he denied them. Bash and Conde think this is the Catholics going after the Protestants to spread terror, and later they get a notice that something terrible has happened to the shepherd's family. And when they arrive at the shepherd's farm, his entire family has been murdered and he is covered in blood. He keeps repeating, "I said no," and when they rip his clothes off, he has a mark on his chest. He claims the riders held him down and let the devil in. Bash and Conde warn Francis of a reckoning, and Francis is spooked. Given everything that's already going on with his father showing up, his father's ghosts and stuff showing up, rightfully so, I would say. Lord Narcisse shows back up at court with the midwife who helped Lola give birth in the end of the last season, and the woman that was later found in the cage. And they're engaged, but Estelle, who is the woman, is very clearly scared, and she goes to hug Lola in hello and offer her a gift, and in the gift is a note saying, "Help me." Lola visits her privately, and Estelle claims she married him to keep her land and after her entire family died. But since then, she's heard horrible rumors about the way that Narcisse treats his wives, that he abuses and kills them, and she asks Lola to act in her capacity as the king's mistress to save her. Now, she's not technically the king's mistress at this point, but the kingdom doesn't really believe that or know that. They kind of believe that she is his mistress, which does provide her a level of safety, but also undermines Mary in some ways, which is a pain point in this season. When Lola goes to Francis and Mary, they pretty much say they can't do anything based on rumors. They can't really step in unless she has been hurt herself. So Lola makes arrangements on her own to get Estelle out at night quietly. Mary asks Condé about the rumors surrounding Narcisse abusing his wives, and he claims he hasn't heard anything, but he burns through his wives quickly and won't want to get rid of his plaything regarding Estelle. So they need to make plans quietly. Mary tries to convince Narcisse to turn his attentions toward other widowed noblewomen, but he is not dissuaded at all, and during the conversation, Narcisse gets word that Estelle escaped and killed one of his guards. When he finds out, he openly threatens to kill Estelle when she's found, and the hunt for her is on. Estelle hides in Lola's chambers, covered in blood, and Mary finds Estelle in Lola's chambers and tells her to give Estelle up. Lola refuses and eventually convinces Mary to help Estelle, and she escapes in a royal carriage. After the christening, Lola is approached by a woman who was with Estelle, who said that Estelle threw herself off of a cliff, claiming her family was waiting for her at the bottom. In the castle morgue, Lola visits Estelle's body to find Narcisse already there, and Narcisse claims he never harmed his other wives, and he only married Estelle because her father owed him a debt, and after her family died, the debt collectors came after her, and he married her to save her. During these couple of episodes, Mary thinks that she is pregnant, something that they have been long awaiting. Even in their short marriage, an heir is incredibly important to royalty, and even though it's early days, Catherine wants to tell everyone, but the morning of the christening, Mary starts to feel pain in her stomach and she bleeds out. The only person that knows about this is Condé. He comes across her in the grounds, visibly in pain, and Condé helps her back to her chambers, where she refuses to see a physician, and he just sits by her side until she recovers. She does eventually attend the christening. Mary loses the baby, and there's a very emotional, heart-wrenching moment when Francis is trying to comfort Mary, and they're mourning their loss together, and to comfort her, he takes her through one of his favorite memories of them together as children, including a facsimile of catching fireflies like they used to as children. Not only do I adore the two of them and think they have incredible chemistry, but their love story is beautiful, it's enduring, it's forgiving, and it's full of endless love. It's honestly the reason that when I was a teenager, I kept coming back to this show, which makes later seasons a little bit upsetting. If you know, you know. And a last important plotline from this episode is that Catherine starts seeing twin ghost girls in the castle that beg for her help, claiming, "You didn't help us before, so help us now." Episode 5 centers around Castleroy and Greer's wedding. If you have watched any CW shows, you know that they tend to center around events. So the event of this episode is Castleroy and Greer's wedding. There is a ton of religious unrest in the land, churches being burned, and people being killed for being Catholic or Protestant. And at the beginning of this episode, a Protestant church is raided during a service and burned to the ground, a church that Castleroy is attending. Bash and Laith, who returned to the kingdom and is now working with Bash as a deputy, are sent to attend to the issue, where Laith sees Castleroy helping an injured man. He tells Castleroy to leave and covers for him, and the Protestant minister brings a dead man to the palace to call for justice. When Condé recognizes the child as his sister's son, Mary and Francis make it very clear that they will not tolerate violence against anyone, but refuses to openly support Protestant believers because of the unrest it's caused in other kingdoms. But he will have the people that burned the church punished. When they're found, none other than Narcisse is leading them, and he claims that Conde's nephew gravely injured the boy and it was just retaliation. He and the other Catholic nobles ask Francis to pardon the murderer's actions, stating that it was Conde's nephew who started it. Francis refuses to release the murderers, and Conde tells Mary that this was all planned in an attempt to get back at his family. He reveals the writer's mark on his shoulder, and he thinks it's the Catholic extremists leaving the marks. Bash starts asking questions around the kingdom about the deaths, and the violence ramps up. And despite Catherine's protestations, Francis has all of the Protestant and Catholic arrested. Marie and Conde question the murderers and convince a man to tell them the truth, and he tells them that their leader, not Narcisse but another man that they had already captured, found an injured boy in a local village and used him as an excuse to get back at a Protestant church. Mary tells Francis and recommends to him that both parties be punished. Francis decides to let the murderers go. This obviously causes friction between Mary and Francis, but he refuses to explain to her what's going on, and Mary wrongfully guesses it's because of their lost baby, and he believes that she's failed him. Because this episode only starts days after Mary's miscarriage, she's still very hurt, very sensitive, and there's a lot of episodes of these scenes of her seeing children and yearning to be a mother. In the midst of all of this, Francis finds a shard of a javelin that killed his father with, left on their bedroom chamber pillows. Then he sees the possessed nanny standing ominously at the end of the corridor, and when he confronts her about leaving the shard, she starts sobbing and claims she wakes up in places she doesn't remember, having done things she can't recall. In public, at a party, Henry seems to have taken over her body again and sits on the king's throne, so Francis has her held for questioning, and Henry tells him he will never move on until it's revealed that Francis killed him. He pushes Francis into admitting he murdered Henry, and Narcisse overhears it. Narcisse tries to convince Francis that he won't tell anyone and that Francis chooses not. After Francis releases him, Narcisse releases the nanny from her cell and admits to ordering the nanny to fake her possession, and has the Lord, who people think that killed Henry, Lord Montgomery, ready to tell the world it wasn't him. Narcisse intends to weaken Francis and make him more easy to manipulate, and he threatens to expose the truth if Francis doesn't release the Catholic murderers and come under the heel of the Catholic nobles again. Episode 6 kicks off with Francis trying to recover the state of his marriage, but Mary puts up very clear boundaries that she isn't happy and she won't pretend otherwise. Later in the episode, Catherine and Mary bond over miscarriages and being in loveless marriages while they're alone, and Catherine advocates for Mary with Francis, basically calling him a giant idiot and to take his head out of his ass. And Francis confesses to lying about his disappointment to Mary about the baby, but still backs out of telling her the truth of the blackmail. During this episode, the main plot centers around Catherine and Mary traveling to one of the villages that Catherine takes care of for their love. You know, she garners favor with them, so they'll still love her as a queen. However, on their way, their carriage gets attacked and overtaken, and they manage to escape and make their track through the woods. They come across a village where they pretend to be ladies' maids, and they're forced to work for food and beds. And while having dinner at the inn, a couple pretending to be the king and queen of France show up, and the fake king gives a speech about needing funds for war and starts taking people's money. Back at the castle, Francis gets word that Mary and Catherine are missing, so he leaves the castle with all his soldiers to find them. While out searching for Mary, they come across a woman who claims the king of France burned down her barn because they wouldn't give them enough money. Mary and Catherine visit the fake queen in her chambers and ask her to take them to the next village where a royal a loyal duke rules and they know that they can get away. And it becomes obvious to the fake queen that Mary and Catherine know the truth, and they convince her that they're also actors and offer her jewels to take them to the next village. The fake king comes back and discovers the fake queen has told them the truth. The real royal guards find Mary and Catherine, but when Mary sends them in after the fakes, we as the viewer find out that the guards have been helping the fakes. They kill the whole troop, working with the kings and queens, and make plans to kill and bury Mary and Catherine. However, the fake queen tells them everything, and when the carriage on the way back to the castle stops, the guard reveals that the Queen of England is responsible for the imposter couple sowing discord across France in their name. As retaliation for Mary wearing the English coat of arms last season, and the fake queen tries to kill him, fails, he kills her, and then Mary stabs one of the carriage's horses, who kicks the dude and kills him, and then they're saved by the, Francis and their guards and all that. So episode 7 introduces a new kind of reoccurring / main character, and it's Princess Claude, who is Catherine's daughter and Francis's sister, like full sister, so Catherine and Henry's daughter and Francis's full-blooded sister, and she's back at court. She's something immediately of a wild card. She flashes her tits for some alcohol and flirts with the guards, and she just generally brings a bit of chaos to the court, having sex with random people and causing interpersonal problems, including a sexual relationship she had with Bash, her half-brother. And her mother spends the time that she's, for the first portion of the time that she's on the show, trying to marry her off. And her presence is also a bit of a humanizing effort for Catherine about her role as a mother throughout her children's lives, specifically how she dealt with Claude and the passing of some of her other daughters, which we'll talk about again later. Narcisse shows up at Francis and Mary's morning breakfast to request that Francis approve a new law. The law would require every French subject to publicly declare their faith on punishment of death. Narcisse and the nobles are all in favor of it, and it seems to be a way to root out Protestant believers and mark them for death. Privately, Narcisse blackmails Francis into signing it, but Mary urges Francis not to accept the edict, and he refuses to go against the nobles. So this episode kind of takes both of them on two separate tracks. The first one being Mary seeking the help of Condé. She wants Condé to convince some of the secretly Protestant nobles to stand up against the edict and prove that not all of the nobles are in favor of it. And then Francis's part, has Bash surveilling Narcisse to figure out how to take Narcisse down. Mainly it's to find Montgomery, the guy that everybody thinks killed King Henry, so that they can get rid of him and they can get rid of the maid, and then they can take down Narcisse and he won't have any power. Catherine manages to find an English cipher in that guard from the previous episode that betrayed them in his rooms, and she gives it to Francis, who has Lola plant the English cipher in Narcisse's house to implicate him as a traitor. At this point, Lola and Narcisse have already started their relationship that we spoke about previously. That evening she does plant the cipher, but Narcisse is very sneaky, and he kind of can figure something is up, especially when Lola is not really playing along with his games. He is able to convince Lola that Francis is manipulating her by telling her the truth of him killing Henry and the blackmail, all of that. Bash ends up finding the nanny dead, and it spurns Francis into taking a stand. During Francis's confrontation with Narcisse reveals that he knows that Mary and Catherine tried and failed to poison Henry first. Interestingly enough, in his threats, he says the nobles will kill his entire family, including his son, and it will be the end of his line. Now, if I recall correctly, this harkens back to Nostradamus' prophecy in the first season, but I can't remember exactly the wording. So Francis is forced to sign the edict based on Narcisse not only threatening him, but his family and his children, and rightfully, Mary tells him that he's not the man she fell in love with. The man she loves would never sign an edict like this, and he tells her to go to Scotland, and the episode ends with him sitting on the throne alone in an empty room. In this episode, Catherine also continues to see the two ghost girls around the castle, and one of them coughs up a red flower that she pins to her twin sister's dress and says, "Sisters shared." At the end of the episode, she sees the two girls again and intuits that they're her dead twin daughters, and they claim that they never left her and threaten Claude's life. So Catherine tries to send Claude away with a husband, which is her entire scheme for this first portion of the season, is to get Claude away, marry her off, and get her away from these twins who are threatening her. In episode 8, the edict goes through, and cardinals from the Vatican are having any person suspected of heresy disfigured and marked as such on their house. Mary and Francis are beefing. Francis is trying to get Mary to go back to Scotland, so he's being awful, and Mary refuses to abandon France. Conde is kidnapped and brought to a Protestant leader of the region, who takes him to a Protestant gathering in the woods. He asks Conde to get the Protestant minister an audience with the crown. This is the same minister that was part of the church being burnt down, and Conde initially thinks that that's what the meeting is about. He shows up with the minister in front of Mary and Francis and asks them to approve the minister rebuilding the church. And when the minister is given a chance to speak, he threatens them with bombs. He was like, "I'm not here to talk about a church. If you don't stop these attacks that are happening from the cardinal, we're going to set off bombs that we have placed around the kingdom." Obviously, this pisses off Francis, and so he has the minister arrested, and he has Bash and Conde set off to find who the minister was working with. They ask around for Protestant churchgoers, and before they can really get any information, their family is taken away by a cardinal. And later Conde tells Francis and Mary that he was found by influential Protestants who claim that they know nothing about the bombing and it was just some fringe radicals. Francis goes on to question the minister while Mary and Conde talk about the plan to deal with the Protestants. Mary and Conde figure out that it must be a ruse to get the French court to kill the minister and make him a martyr for the cause. But under questioning by Francis, who guarantees that no Protestants will be harmed, the minister reveals the location of the bombs. They go to the local monastery, and the barrels are a ruse. Painted on the monastery's wall is "Blood will flow." And Mary interrupts Francis torturing the minister, and he has a bit of a moment where he realizes that he's become someone he doesn't recognize. The minister isn't killed, but he is gravely injured, and while Bash and the other guards are transporting the minister to a physician in a local town, they get attacked by Protestants who murder the minister. While the minister is being killed, Bash hears the Protestants say that there were no bombs, and later there's a disturbance in the village outlying the castle, and Mary, Francis, and Conde leave to find the minister hung up on an upside-down cross and a riot in the village square. Mary blames Francis for this. I mean, it basically is his fault. In this episode, Lola also confronts Francis with the truth of Henry's death and Narcisse's blackmail, and Francis tells her, "Hey, Narcisse threatened your child." And this kind of kicks Lola in the ass and tells Francis that she actually did plant the English cipher in his home. And when Narcisse returns to his country estate, Bash and the guards search his home, and the cipher isn't there. We also see a flashback of Catherine finding her two twin girls dead, having been suffocated by red flowers that match the flowers Claude used to complain the babies would pull off of her dress. Tensions are really escalating with the Protestants and the Catholics, and Narcisse is only becoming more insistent and more ruthless with his decisions, holding things over Francis, and so they are desperate to find a way to out Narcisse. Bash brings in a father that was being held hostage by Narcisse, who claims that one of Narcisse's men named Bellefonte was in charge of watching all of his hostages. Why this regular man had hostages to begin with is I I don't know, but he does. They need to find a way to incite Narcisse to call Bellefonte to court, and they can follow him back. Mary, Francis, and Condé decide it's a good idea to set up a marriage between Condé and Claude because it'll show the crown is at peace with both faiths. This completely sets Narcisse off. He's completely against the wedding, and he confronts Francis about it, and Francis is acting completely unhinged. He's irritable and not sleeping, and his behavior is very similar to Henry's right before he died, and Narcisse tries to calm him down, and Francis sends him off. Thankfully, it's all a ruse to get Narcisse to take a step towards dethroning Francis, and after Narcisse fails to convince Francis, he proposes to Claude instead, and Francis convinces her to say no. This last-ditch attempt failing spurns Narcisse into action, and he tells Bellefonte to bring Montgomery to the castle. Bash and Francis chase after Bellefonte, having told Mary that he was going to the Vatican. They find Montgomery tied up, and they try to get him to sign a confession, but he lies about knowing the truth about who killed Henry, so Bash kills him. Going forward, there's a lot of tough stuff that we're going to talk about, and I'm not going to go into like the actual acts that happen, but I will say watching this was incredibly jarring. This was before TV shows really did like trigger warnings and things at the beginning of their episodes, but this is the start of a sexual assault happening to Mary. While Francis and Bash are gone, Protestant men sneak into the castle disguised as guards with the intention of killing Francis in his bed. But they take Mary in hostage, and they start to get antsy when Francis doesn't show up, so they hold Mary down and rape her. She manages to bash one of them over the head and makes it to Catherine, who comforts her. She convinces Mary to hide what happened, and again, Francis has left Mary to get up in her grief alone and comfort their people. She makes the announcement to their court that she and Francis are safe, and the attacks failed. It's actually a massively emotional moment, and I did cry. I did, especially when Francis makes it back and she has to tell him what happened, and there's just so much pain on both ends. Francis feels this immense guilt for why he was actually out of the castle and keeping all of these things from Mary, and Mary's feeling all of the feelings that come along with being assaulted in this way. And those things don't just end after this episode. It carries through for the rest of the season. So the rest of the season is quite emotional, and I did cry multiple times. It might just be because I was sick, but it's very hard, and these actors are really good. So we go into the rest of the season knowing that there is this dynamic now with Mary, and that affects all of her relationships with everyone. Episode 10 is very heavy. It's very emotional. It's there's a lot of anger, and it centers around them trying to find and arrest and lock up the men who attacked Mary and the kingdom, even though the kingdom believes that the assassination failed. Francis has Bash looking for a man by the name that Mary overheard while the attack was happening. And Condé is searching for the Protestant leader. They think that the Protestants are in charge of the assassination, so Condé goes to get some answers. And there's an incredibly heartbreaking scene in which Mary is standing in the courtyard full of prisoners looking for the man who assaulted her. She's distraught, she's not eating, she's not sleeping, and she's blaming herself. And Francis also feels guilt for not being at the castle. So Francis tells her the truth of Narcisse. The attack sends Francis into a spiral of vengeance, and he leaves prisoners out in the winter night to freeze to death, and has anyone who riots in the prisons killed and hung up in the courtyard for all to see. Mary does tell the ladies in waiting what happened, to her, and Lola decides to right her wrongs with Narcisse. So she helps Francis find Narcisse. Francis races out to confront Narcisse himself, and he finds him sleeping in a barn, and they have a fight. Narcisse claims he's left all of his money and land to the Protestants, who will only use it against the crown, whereas if Francis keeps him alive, he'll be on his best behavior and be his most loyal follower. Francis obviously isn't persuaded by the idea of Narcisse's tune changing, but he doesn't kill him, and he plans to basically use him as a puppet. Honestly, I think this turns out way worse than if he had just killed him, but choices were made. Catherine continues to be visited by her dead daughters and is now seeing blood on her hands. The children force her to say out loud that she covered up their murders, but the ghosts can't move on without Catherine killing Claude in return. Catherine tries one more time to convince Claude to leave, and it doesn't work, so Catherine slowly starts poisoning her. She then starts seeing Henry, and they have full-on ghost sex. But during it, he demands that she keep saying, "I want you back," which is probably not good, but she says it anyways. Conde and the Protestant leaders seek out the person funneling money to the assassins and find him hanged. Conde tells Mary that they couldn't talk to the funder, and she asks him to bring the man's wife to interrogate. The man's wife reveals that her husband was being forced to fund the Protestant assassins and was supposed to leave money for the attackers to find in a safe house. Mary convinces Conde to go to the safe house with her to find them, and they find them in the safe house. They are about to have them rounded up and arrested, and in a fit of rage, Mary has the place set on fire, and the men are left in it to burn to death. And honestly, it's a wicked fucking scene. It's so good. And at the end of this portion, there's like this slow zoom in shot of Mary as she watches the house burn, and it's amazing. To make the whole thing even more devastating, Mary ends her marriage with Francis because she blames him, and she can't help but link her assault to him. She tells him they will be married in name only, but they will live separately. Conde's brother, Anton, who is the king of Navarre, shows up in Conde's chambers at the French court and asks him why he isn't spying on the French court royalty for him anymore. And Mary finds a letter from Conde saying he's in love with her. The letter that Conde wrote to her that she never received during the attack. Episode 11 follows a couple of weeks after the previous episode, and the bodies in the courtyard of the prisoners who rioted are being cut down. And they're found with the same mark of the dark hooded rioters on all of their bodies. A visiting cardinal comes across the bodies and claims responsibility for them and the investigation into the brand. Thinking it's the sigil of some sort of brotherhood, Bash goes to the cardinal and says he thinks the brand was done after death. The church has started encouraging villagers to rat on anyone they see or suspect has the same brand, and a noblewoman comes to the church claiming she saw the brand on Conde during sex. Mary overhears this accusation and saves Conde, and they go on the road together, hoping to get him to his brother's winter estate. When they get there, he invites Mary to stay, and Conde's brother encourages Conde to seduce Mary to gain her ear in favor of the Protestants. The Vatican guards show up at Anton's court, and Mary cauterizes off Conde's brand. While doing it, she's forced to touch his skin, and she's able to do it, and that leads her to believe that she will be okay, she will make things work with Francis, who she knows is suffering too, and she will heal. And while she's away, Francis decides to get his act together and start actually fighting back. He and Bash make plans to fight against the Vatican and the cardinals. Conde and Mary arrive back to court to find everything resolved. Mary is thrilled by Francis taking a stand toward a shared goal and rushes to find him, only to find him asleep in bed with Lola and their child. And during this episode, Catherine is just like having ghost sex with Henry, who no one can see, and is actively poisoning her daughter. They're playing house with she's playing house with all of the little ghosts, like her twins and Henry. Claude starts like getting sick. And Kenna sees what's going on and tells Bash, and Bash tells her to investigate, so she does. And she starts healing and helping and taking care of Claude, and she tells Claude the truth that her mother has poisoned her. Claude finds the poison and confronts Catherine, and Catherine tells Claude that she actually murdered her sisters when she was only 5 years old. Catherine has like this moment of clarity, or this like strike of conscience, and she forces Ghost Henry and the children back into the shadows. At the beginning of episode 12, after having seen Lola, Francis, and John sleeping together peacefully, Mary expresses regret to Francis for not giving him a peaceful marriage with children. She reasserts that she can't be touched, she can't be near men, and she needs time to be comfortable again. But she does want to work with him in their monarchy capacity. So they work together to divide up Narcisse's property. Mary calls for Condé to be granted land, but he refuses it because he doesn't believe in Francis as a king. During the conversation with Condé, Mary touches Condé's arm and Francis sees it. So Francis, in a fit of jealousy, confronts Condé and is basically, she's my wife, cut that shit out, in pretty words, of course, and Condé's like, I love her and you don't deserve her, you little bitch ass. Including blaming him for not protecting her in the assassination attempt. They have a literal sword fight in front of everyone, and it becomes immediately obvious that there's some sort of animosity between them. After the party, in which Francis made a complete ass of himself, he tells Mary that he can't live separate from her, and the speculations about her getting with Condé could ruin the legitimacy of any child they might have in the future. Rightfully calling out the sexism in this logical fallacy, men can sleep around while women have to stay chaste, especially queens, she gives it right back to him, and she tells him that he's trying to control her. And him bringing up the paternity of a child they have is obviously incredibly painful, because that's something that she explicitly said when she was assaulted to everyone. I can't hear talk of babies until I know that I'm not pregnant by what happened. Additionally, Diane is back at the court because Bash is going to gift her some lands, and she's already a problem, like right off the bat, with Kenna and Bash. Claude tells Bash what Catherine accused her of, murdering her sisters, and asks him to look into the death of her siblings. Bash locates the twins' nanny, who has since married into nobility. She claims she left the children for a moment, and when she came back, they were dead. When they ask her if she saw the flowers in their throats, she says, of course, which only three people knew about: the doctor, Catherine, and the killer. The nanny reveals she was seduced away by Henry, and she was away for hours. When she came back, the windows were thrown open and the babies were cold and dead. She knew she would be killed if Catherine found out, so she shoved Claude's flowers down their throat and let Catherine believe that Claude did it. Meanwhile, while all of this is going on, Catherine is having an entire fucking mental breakdown and playing house with Henry and the dead twins, and she talks to them in front of people. During the episode, she's waffling between believing she's losing her mind and wanting to be with her ghost family or be with her alive children. She chases Henry and the children through the snow at night, and she falls asleep outside. Thankfully, Bash does save her life, and Bash tells her the truth of the twins' death, and she starts talking mad shit about Henry, about how unfaithful he was, how horrible he was, how he lied all the time. Catherine does end up sending the ghost twins away because she recognizes that they're not real, that they're just an extension of her consciousness, and she sends Henry away, but he promises her it's not that easy and disappears. And something she says sparks a memory in Bash's mind, calls to mind a fight between Diane and Henry that they had days before the twins died. And Diane confirms that she killed the babies to get back at Henry and Catherine. As Diane is leaving the castle, after Bash kicked her out, Catherine finds her and murders her. Alright, we have 2 more episodes and then we're caught up to what I have watched. Let's see if we can do this. Alright, so Episode 13, we're introduced to Antoine, who is Condé's brother and the King of Navarre. It's a very small country on the border of France, and he is visiting France to renew his treaty with France. But he also wants France to pay Navarre for the Protestant refugees that have come to the country and used up their funds. Francis is very resistant to Navarre any funds because of Antoine's power-hungry personality, and the Bourbon family, who is Antoine's family, their previous attempts to take the French crown when Francis was a child. He has Narcisse, who's now basically his puppet, look into why they could actually need the funds and what they're hiding. And he finds that Navarre does need money. And they've turned to England. There's also a rumor that they have English troops on the border of France ready to attack France at any point. And when Francis and Mary confront Antoine about the claims, he says he didn't agree to anything with the English yet. And he also tells them that the English queen is building a network of spies throughout the world, and a lot of other countries are scared of her. And she's also prepping a plan to attack France, given the strong stance of Protestants that the French crown has taken, and the fact that Mary attempted to lay a claim in the previous season. During this episode, while all of that is going on, Mary and Francis are slowly repairing their relationship through Francis's caretaking and steady presence for her. He plans a vacation for them, sleeps on the couch in her room, and they eventually get to a point where she feels comfortable enough to sleep in the same bed. Unfortunately, this doesn't last, because after the Anton incident, Mary walks back on any progress that they've made, and she eventually ends the romantic relationship and tells him to find someone else. Anton also has taken an interest in Kenna and Bash. He suspects that Bash killed their brother Marcus, and he plans to get on Kenna's good side and ruin Bash's life and seduce her a wee bit. Anton gets very drunk, and Bash helps him get back to safety in his chambers, but Anton is sneaky. He's not royalty for no reason, and he uses the time to confirm his suspicions about Bash's involvement in his brother's death. And he makes plans to capture and torture Bash. Catherine starts having hallucinations of Francis dying, and the physician diagnoses her with syphilis. Narcisse uses this opportunity to cuddle up to Catherine, and they find out that she doesn't have syphilis, she's actually been poisoned. And the source of the poison is Henry's Bible that Catherine took from his chambers and reads every night. And all of the symptoms that Catherine is having are very similar to how Henry was acting. Meanwhile, Bash investigates claims that dead men have been rising from their graves in local villages, and when he visits a graveyard in a local village, he finds a broken open grave and speaks to a woman who claims she was chased by the dead man. He finds a Greek man in the woods who claims he was buried alive, and when Bash tries to tell him that he was probably mistakenly buried, he insists he did die, and a woman in white brought him back to life. On the journey back to the castle, Bash and him are overtaken by local men who fear this resurrected man, and they manage to kill him. Episode 14. It kicks off with Conde and Lola, who have been forced to get married. They're not married yet, but Mary wants them to get married at this point. They're going to take a vacation together to get acquainted with each other. But a couple things get in their way before they can do that. Mary's uncle, Duke of Guise, we saw him in the previous season, involved in one of, tried to, make it good with Henry and then get a position with Francis. He shows up to the castle because he wants his position with the crown back, which the position was originally rescinded because he fled after the plague broke out. But the real reason that he claims that he's back in court is to court Catherine. This kind of creates a competition between the Duke of Guise and Narcisse for Catherine's affections during this episode. It doesn't go far. You'll see in a minute why, but that does kind of happen. Catherine tells the family about the poisoned Bible, and they suspect that it's actually they suspect that the person responsible is one of Henry's valets who fled while Henry was dying, rather than waiting like his other servants did to see what rewards he was going to grant them. So Bash puts out a reward for info, and it appears that the valet has ties to Conde and was in the Conde family's army before coming to court. Francis asks Mary to detain Conde before going on vacation with Lola, and Mary uses her wily ways to convince Conde to stay. She manipulates him by telling him that she doesn't want him to be with Lola, and Bash is able to find the valet, but he's dead. Conde and the valet were seen at a bar, and days before Henry started acting sick, all of the valet's debts were paid for. They confront Conde and Anton, but Conde denies it and ousts Bash as their brother's killer. Narcisse independently finds evidence of payments the valet received afterwards, and the transaction lead back to the Duke of Guise. And they burst into the dinner where they're confronting Conde and Anton and tell them the truth. So Bash apologizes and says that he didn't know that he was killing Marcus, which was Marcus Bourbon. And it was just an order from Henry, who told him it was a traitor with no other info when he was a young boy. He was doing it for his king. Anton accepts this apology, and the animosity between the two lines is cleared. It's obviously not cleared, but he tells him that it is, and later he confirms with Conde that he will take down Bash in secret, any way that he needs to. Mary apologizes to Conde, and Conde confesses he still loves her, and he's tired of her yo-yoing with his feelings. They obviously don't use that phrase, that's my phrase, but Conde also works out that Anton actually was responsible and set him up in the scheme to be framed with the valet situation. He basically tells Anton to fuck off, but he doesn't. And we also get the reveal that Narcisse was responsible for clearing the trail for Anton with the intention of getting paid, and he actually had the Duke of Guise murdered on his travels. And Narcisse makes it clear that now they owe each other. They have these secrets on each other, and he fully intends to get back his position at court however he needs to. Lastly, Mary apologizes for using Conde and admits to having feelings for him, despite them not being able to do anything. She says, "You'll be the death of me, and I of you," and walks away. And that's the end of the episode. So, shocked that I got through this, was able to tell you everything that happened in this set of episodes. That was so much talking. So, I need to watch the rest of the season. It's 22 episodes. I'm on episode 15. So, I'll probably just come back when I have done that. So, we are joined in the office today by Oswald. I don't know if you can see him, but he's decided to take my chair. So, we're going to sit like this until he gets tired of it. We left off at episode 15, Mary's uncle had just passed. So when we open episode 15, her mom, Marie de Guise, is in France for his funeral, and she is immediately talking about babies and causing trouble really just for Mary. She obviously is going through a lot still emotionally, but she doesn't want to tell her mother of the assault that happened to her because she doesn't really trust her mom. She doesn't trust that her mom is going to handle it with care that she should. And so her mom starts grilling her about when she's going to produce an heir. And there's a couple of things going on in this episode. They're not really that important to the overall plot. But the first thing is that Francis sets up an engagement with a wealthy, well-to-do family for his son, John. And it doesn't go particularly well because Lola gets high off of opiates that Marie de Guise uses, and then tells him that their baby is ugly. But that is one plot that happens in this episode. I don't think we see him figure it out, or we don't see it go anywhere. Also in this episode, Bash visits a village woman who claims a woman in white cured her son, but by curing him left him blind. And he visits a local convent where a woman named Delphine is a nun, and she claims that the other nuns took her in because she has the ability to cure people, but it does come with a cost. And she touches Bash and tells him that he will lose someone he loves very soon, but she doesn't know who. Francis and Mary in this episode kind of try to get back to producing an heir in a very mechanical way, and it's really heartbreaking to watch. You can feel the love and tenderness between them. Francis can tell that she's very uncomfortable, and he ends up ending their attempt, and Mary keeps pushing the narrative that she should move on to others and doesn't deny Francis when he asks her if she wants to be with Conde. He does eventually forbid her from seeing him, and when Francis tells Catherine that his chances of having an heir are done, she encourages him to seek out family elsewhere, heavily implying Lola, since they already have a child together and all that. Later in the episode, Mary meets Conde and tells him she has feelings for him, but can't promise him anything, and that Francis has forbidden them from seeing each other. And it seems, like I alluded to earlier, that Marie de Guise is addicted to opiates, and when Mary confronts her about it, she tells Mary that she's dying. Mary should return to Scotland and rule in person. Sparks the idea in Mary of leaving France and Francis and going back and ruling Scotland. And she asks Conde to join her, and he agrees. And at the end of the episode, Anton tells Conde that the Queen of England is interested in courting him to be her future king consort. Like I said, this episode wasn't particularly interesting, but it did spark a lot of the future episodes. The whole Mary returning to Scotland, being with Conde thing plays a huge part in the remaining episodes and what happens at the end of the season. So episode 16 centers around a wine tasting party in which lords and dukes are set to bring their daughters to catch Francis's eye and become their mistress. Narcisse brings along a woman who he claims is his niece, but he makes very sexual comments about her that are pretty weird, and he alludes to having tested her first. It's very weird. Francis does apologize to Mary for all of the women showing up in the castle vying for his attention, and she tries to again reiterate that they should live separate lives, and Francis rightfully calls it out as a desire to be with Conde and makes it clear that any relationship with Conde would result in both of their deaths, even if it's not necessarily his decision to kill them. Conde agrees to go to Scotland with Mary without telling her the truth of the English proposal, and they ride out in secret together to make plans. And while they are alone in a cabin out in the wilderness and have some intimate moments together, and the following morning someone sees them kissing, and Conde chases the person that saw him kissing, and it leads back to Anton, where Anton is waiting in his carriage, and he threatens to tell Francis about Conde and Mary's affair, and Conde ends things with Mary, but doesn't tell her the truth about Elizabeth. Francis ends up hooking up with Narcisse's niece, and immediately regrets it, and Lola sees him suffering, looking like hell, regretting his decision, and Francis tells her the truth about Mary wanting to be with Conde. Lola begs him not to give up on Mary, but also to do what he can to protect his wife, while she turns to Conde for support. And she has an incredibly insightful point about Mary thinking Conde is her only way to heal, and Francis asks, basically, so I'm supposed to wait around while she has an affair with another man? And Lola says, well, it depends on how much you love her. Francis ends up going to her and telling her, I don't like it, I still love you, I still want us to be together, but I will do everything that I can to protect you. Anton finally leaves court, but not before calling Mary a slut, getting punched, and all but sentencing Conde to death by retracting the possible engagement with Elizabeth. Francis tries to make a move on Lola, and she denies him, which I'm incredibly grateful for. I don't know that I necessarily could have done with any more drama between the three of them, and despite telling Mary that he'll stay in France, be discreet and love her, Conde accepts the marriage proposal to Elizabeth. Episode 17 is centered around, again, them sort of making plans. Mary sends an envoy to Scotland, because Scotland has a lot of unrest between the Protestants and the Catholics, so she kind of wants to enter Scotland with an army at her back, and Conde says that he will secure an army for her, but they need to find a safe place to enter Scotland. So she sends out an envoy, and the envoy goes missing and winds up dead. They talk to the other envoy, who says he found his body outside of the tavern the morning after they were sent out, and he thinks there are spies following them who killed the envoy intentionally and took the message from Mary that was supposed to go to her army. Meanwhile, England, via a man named Burgess, is pressuring Conde to leave to go to England to meet Elizabeth in 2 days. So he puts the pressure on Mary to leave before she's ready, and Mary pushes back. Conde is forced to reveal his secret meeting with England. She pretty summarily puts him in his place, but Lola forces her to see Conde's side, that he's taking a massive risk, provoking the ire of Elizabeth for a married queen who can really give him nothing except, maybe a swift death. And Mary has the English diplomat Burgess, working with Conde, arrested and charged with being sent to stir up the Protestants' revolt in France. She threatens to send his head back to Elizabeth if he doesn't admit to his crimes. Conde saves Burgess, and Burgess reveals that Scotland isn't in dire straits, as Mary had been led to believe, and in fact, England has mostly left Scotland alone, hoping that their infighting between the Protestants and Catholics will solve the issue for them. Narcisse has a meeting with Renaud, who is his army general, and the man who murdered Mary's envoy. He gives Narcisse the letters from Mary, who then takes them to Catherine. Narcisse sets Conde and Mary up to reveal their own treachery, but Catherine wants Mary saved from making a life-ruining choice. Mary's envoy returns her letters, still sealed to her, and Mary is prepared to leave for Scotland, believing no one knows. Mary demands Conde make a decision between her or Elizabeth, and Conde chooses her. But as Catherine is pleading with Francis to stop them, Francis collapses, and while he's unconscious in his bed, bleeding from his ears, Mary and Conde are having sex. During this episode, Bash is also he goes to a local village where the chief of police is abusing his power and also abusing his wife, and he strips him of his power, and in revenge, the guy stabs Bash, and Bash gets saved by Delphine, that nun / whatever. In episode 18, Francis still hasn't woken up and he's still bleeding from his ears, and the physicians claim it's an infection that could lead to death. Lola rides out to find Mary and Conde the next morning to tell Mary, and when she arrives in Francis's room, any goodwill won between Catherine and Mary has been completely obliterated. She tells Mary that she and Francis know of Mary's betrayal, and that Francis found out right before he collapsed. Rumors of Francis's health have already started spreading, so Mary meets with the royal advisors, who she tells that Francis is out hunting. An advisor tells Mary that Protestant rebels in Scotland have gotten more violent and are going after Mary's supporters. Mary prepares to use French forces to help Scotland in her position as acting king, but the clock is ticking, because if Francis dies, she won't have any power in France anymore. Catherine flat out refuses to allow this to happen. When Mary turns to Conde and asks if he knows of any mercenaries they can send to Scotland instead of French troops, he mentions a band run by a man named Renaud, who previously worked for Narcisse. Mary confronts Narcisse about his illegal army and demands that he brings Renaud to her with the expectation of answering only to her. Narcisse takes this request to Catherine, and she tells him to delay Mary until Francis can wake up or until he dies. If he dies, then the power would then move to Catherine as acting regent, and her youngest son, would become king. She visits Francis in his chambers and cries over his body, and he awakens. Now, around this time, Bash wakes up in Delphine's house. She confirms that she used her gift to heal him, but she doesn't know what the price will be. Bash rushes back to identify the man who stabbed him and see him hanged by the villagers, but he also discovers that they are set to hang Clarissa from the first season. She ended up not dying, and she has been caught by local villagers to be a witch. They're about to hang her. He ends up saving her. He's going to take her back to France, but around this time he finds out that Francis has fallen ill right around the same time that he saved Clarissa. So he has the assumption that this means that the prophecy that Nostradamus had is still in effect, and he gets it in his head that he has to kill Clarissa in order to save Francis. At court, Francis wakes up at the same time that Bash kills Clarissa. We assume this means that the prophecy is over, and when Bash returns to the kingdom, everything is fine. And at the end of the episode, Francis is awake, and Mary tells Conde that she cannot leave France ever. She tells him all she can offer him is her heart, and he tells her he doesn't know if it's enough. She leaves and sits by Francis's side while he sleeps. Episode 19 starts several weeks after the end of the last episode. Bash comes to court to notify Francis that a monastery has been taken over by Protestants. Angry that Francis sent troops to Scotland to fight the Protestants there. Heavily armed, and they've killed all the monks and guards and taken the children hostage. France doesn't have any troops available, so they send envoys to negotiate and prepare the castle guards to deploy. The Protestants refuse to negotiate and make it known that they have tons of gunpowder and attempt to make bombs that they will use, and Francis tells Bash to take the remaining guards and kill all of the Protestants. However, when they arrive, it's clear that they prepared and had archers at the ready and kill 3 of their soldiers. Catherine suggests Renaud take over, and Bash agrees. Bash and Renaud's men take back the monastery and save the boys. However, Renaud tells Bash that 2 boys were killed before they could stop him, and his right-hand man was killed too. Narcisse has some of Conde's men killed, and Bash finds their body outside of the monastery. In her capacity as Madame, later confirms to Kenna that she heard through Renaud's men that his right hand died because Renaud chose to save a rich man's son instead of a group of other children from poor families. Lola, Kenna, and Mary are sitting down to tea, and they pressure Mary to talk about Conde. They ask if she's sure if she even wants to be with him, and she says, basically, he sacrificed so much for me. And when Lola asks if she's just confusing gratitude for love, she says, I will not abandon him. Conde visits Mary in his chambers after he gets word that he's being framed and begs her to leave France with him, and she tells him no, but he agrees to stay until she can convince Francis to pardon him. But before he can be pardoned, Conde gets stopped by one of Elizabeth's envoys in the street and tells him his involvement with Mary has caused the Protestant outrage. They originally thought it was the troops, but it's actually Conde. But Elizabeth isn't swayed and accepts Conde's offer of marriage. Before Mary's letter of protection can reach Conde, he marries Elizabeth through a proxy and is crowned the King Louis of England. However, the next morning, as Conde and the English envoy are heading to port, they see a fire in the village that they were just in, and the English convoy confirms to Conde that the proxy bride and all evidence of his marriage to the English throne has been destroyed. Francis finds out that Mary knew Conde was courting Elizabeth and isn't swayed by Mary's claims that she decided to end things with Conde for him for their marriage, and he tells Mary if Elizabeth has a claim to England and France through Conde, their reign would be over. Now, the last couple episodes of this season are quite packed. I would say a lot more packed than the previous episodes have been, mostly centered around the conflict with Conde. So going into episode 20, Conde is a wanted man, and Francis fully intends to kill him. He's essentially committed treason against the crown. Mary meets Conde in the woods, and they plan to get him out of court through a fur shipment, and they say their final goodbyes. However, the escape attempt doesn't work, and he gets captured by Renaud. He's then rescued by Englishmen who kill Renaud's men and race off with Conde. And they tell him Elizabeth is still willing to marry him if he takes the throne of France. He starts meeting with Protestant people in France to get them on his side, and Renaud tells Francis and Catherine that Conde had help, outside of just the English. He had French papers, and this obviously sends Francis over the edge. He accuses Mary of putting her personal life above her position as queen, and all but says he could never forgive her for her relationship with Condé. He could never see beyond the two of them naked together. That Condé is too ingrained in her heart, and Mary seeks Francis's forgiveness, and he makes it clear he can never forgive her while Condé is still alive, threatening everything that they love. Episode 21, the hunt for Condé continues, and it's clear he's planning a coup. While out hunting for him, Renaud is found by Condé's men, and he makes a deal with Renaud while holding Renaud's son hostage to go against Francis. He also captures one of Francis' guards to send Francis a message that Condé is coming for him. Francis tells Bash to round up Renaud's men, not knowing that he's turned, and reaches out to his cousin, the King of Spain, for help. The castle is evacuated except for Catherine and Francis, and when Mary tries to leave, Renaud's men capture her for Condé. A fight breaks out between her guards, and she manages to escape on horseback alone, and when she makes it back to the castle and tells them that Renaud has flipped. Just as Renaud arrives, a fight ensues and they take Renaud hostage. He snitches on Condé and tells them that Condé has over 1,000 men, and they're his army, Renaud's men, and Protestant French lords. And Condé and Francis have a one-on-one outside, and Condé rushes the castle with all of his troops. He demands a one-on-one with Francis outside the castle walls, and he tells Francis to surrender, that he's dispatched all of Francis's calls for help, and that no one is coming to help him. But if he surrenders by dawn, if he doesn't surrender by dawn, they'll attack. Mary sneaks out to Condé's camp at the end of the episode, and she tells him that she's pregnant and begs him to save her. In episode 22, Mary is set out to cause unrest in Condé's camp, and when her best efforts fail, she stabs Condé. Francis and Bash see the unrest in Condé's army and decide to attack, and the war is ended pretty quickly. I mean, this is like the first 30 minutes of the final episode, and Condé is arrested. Francis does decide to save Condé's life in a sign of diplomacy and to force the Bourbon family to give up any claim to the French throne. Renaud is hanged, but before he dies, he tells Kenna that Elizabeth will never stop until Mary is dead, and it's not just on a political front. Francis receives a blanket covered in John's blood, and one of Condé's men confesses to killing John. Narcisse offers to find Lola, because they went off together, John and Lola went off together before the war broke out, and finds them both alive. Before word can get back to the castle, an imposter executioner is sent in to set Condé free, and Narcisse tells Mary the truth and blames Catherine for John's fake murder. And she all but admits it and is exiled by Francis from France. Mary and Francis finally reconcile, and we get a scene of Francis talking to Nostradamus at the end of the episode, and we get the biggest, saddest reveal of the entire season, and that is that Francis is dying. And lastly, Catherine plans to meet with Elizabeth to put Mary to death. So that's it. That's the end of season 2. The reviews for this season are not very favorable, which is weird to me because I feel like people watching season 2 are sort of primed to love it. You know, anybody that hated season 1 for the historical inaccuracies or any of the other issues with a historical fiction CW show, like those people probably haven't watched season 2. But critics did not love this. It didn't seem like a lot of the fan base really loved this season either. I don't really blame them. I don't love the Condé and Mary relationship. I understand for Mary's character growth why it's necessary, and I also don't love the sexual assault plotline. I think, like a lot of people, it wasn't handled poorly. I think that the actress for Mary did a fantastic job, but it's always tough to see, and I think when you're watching something like a CW show, that might not be exactly what you want, even though they tend to push like thinking of all the stuff that's in like the Pretty Little Liars show, they tend to push the envelope with stuff like that. But I found this season to be pretty strong. It does lose a little bit of the whimsy and fun from the first season. There's a lot of heavy stuff in this one, so it makes a ton of sense. I really liked it on the rewatch. I found myself really engrossed in the story, and there wasn't really any point where I was like, okay, I could stop watching this, you know? Obviously I was sick, and so that swayed a little bit of my opinions. Like, I just wanted to marathon it while I wasn't feeling very well, but I still found this season to be pretty interesting, pretty riveting. So obviously if you've made it to the end, you probably have watched it as well. But I would say if you're thinking about a rewatch, go ahead and give it a shot. But that is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I would love to talk down below your thoughts on season 2, where the plot lines went, how you feel about the love triangles and all of the mess, because that's really, you know, what we're here for. I would love to talk down below. Please consider subscribing if you are looking for more content like this from me. The third video should be coming soon-ish. I will let you know. All of my social medias are linked down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in my next one.